Okay, and we are recording. It's the home stretch. It's the last day. It's review day, and hopefully everybody's going to have a blast. So let's get started. We are recording. We're at the end of the roadmap, end of the line. Here we go. So today's presenters is everybody that's on the call, and hopefully more folks will join us and they get over to the right conference line. The format today is going to be round robin, which means I'm just going to call people down the list, and whatever topic we happen to be reviewing at that moment, we're going to say one and only one fact about that topic. And then we'll move to the next person and they will add something that hasn't already been said. And we're just going to keep going round and round and round on the topic until nobody has anything more to add to the conversation. Then we'll move to the next topic. We have lots and lots of topics to cover. So let me just get my, come on. I am presenting, right? No, I'm not presenting. So you guys aren't even seeing what I'm seeing. Okay, stand by. All right, so as I was saying, round robin format, one fact about the topic that's on the screen, we're gonna go round robin. I'm gonna go down the list and pick on everybody that's in the group today, and you'll all get a chance to speak, and we're just gonna go until nobody has anything more to add to the topic. And so let's really get started now that you can see my screen. So we're going to start with two-factor authentication. I would say everybody go ahead and unmute as long as you're not in a noisy place so that when it's your turn to speak, you can hop right on. Terry, we're going to start with you.
All right. Two-factor authentication is something that you know and something that you have.
Okay. And why is it, Jeff, why is it important and what are strategies for implementing it?
It's important because it adds an extra level of security above just logging in. Checks back with you on to make sure it's actually you.
Okay. David, what do you want to add to that? David, you're muted.
Sorry, trying to wake up. It's also a nice requirement for high assurance for when you have when you want to really identify and make sure that the person is who they claim to be. Okay,
Brenda.
So a strategy for implementing it would be to use the Salesforce Authenticator app. That'll send a push notification to somebody's phone, and they have to then accept it in order to log in. And you set that up through a login flow.
Cool. All right, Pavitra, what else do you want to add? Pavitra, you need to unmute.
Yes, it is also going to allow for when we have high security sessions. So this becomes important.
Okay. Satish, anything more to add or should we move on?
Yeah, maybe one more thing. So if it's becoming annoying for the users and coming up all the time, they can use the location-based services so that especially in the authenticator, right, Salesforce Authenticator, so that when they're at home, it's not asking for the second factor or at work.
Cool. Very good point. All right. Well, we better wrap back around. Terry might have more stuff we haven't covered yet either.
I was trying to think how we implement it in Salesforce, how we turn it on, and it's a profile permission that is activated, and I think they recommend you setting up either using it in a profile or setting up permission sets to determine who is required to use it.
Okay, cool. Jeff, anything else?
No, nothing else to add.
Okay. David, anything more? Give David a minute.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Brenda?
Nope, nothing else.
Okay. Pavitra, anything else here?
No.
Okay. Satish?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. That's it.
That's it. All right, let's move on. See if there's anything more. Okay, risks that the mechanisms aim to mitigate. Terry, we'll start with you.
Risk that Oh, sorry. I'm trying to think quickly. Where is it? Mitigate. Oh shoot, what's the term? Where somebody
Spoofing.
yeah, is that was yeah, somebody basically trying to log in or with a log in as you. Yeah, I've lost what the term I'm thinking.
Spoofing. Okay.
Yeah, spoofing is probably the best way to say it. So if they've stolen a session ID or somehow got a refresh token, I guess refresh token wouldn't hack it if they've stolen the session ID. That wouldn't work either. If they have the credentials.
But if they have their username and password,
right,
pop them in that case. Okay. David, any other risks that two-factor might mitigate?
No, actually, the only thing I can think of is basically spoofing. If I had your username and password, I can log in as you. If I had your email, but with two-factor authentication, I need a little bit more than just your email.
Okay. Brenda, anything else?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing else.
Anybody have anything else? Sounds like we're all thinking.
Yeah. Just maybe this is a high assurance thing, which is two-factor, but you can have that when for sensitive data, right? Reports and stuff. But maybe that is about high factor.
Yeah. Well, and two-factor is what we use to set up the high assurance, so that's valid. I'll accept that.
Downloading data and sensitive data.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Let's move on. Okay. Given a scenario, determine the most appropriate two-factor authentication mechanism for an identity solution. So let's see, Brenda, we'll start with you.
Sure. So not sure I'm following the question. So just because there's no scenarios, it's a little bit hard.
Right. Well, so I guess the question, so let's talk about what are the different ways you can implement two-factor authentication?
So I said it before, but like the Salesforce Authenticator application or a login flow, some capacity to send an email with a code or anything like that.
Okay. Pavitra, what else? What other ways can we do two-factor?
A Salesforce app or the verification code. So those are the tools which I know of.
Okay. Satish, any other methods?
Well, time-based one-time passcodes, right?
Oh, yeah. Time-based one-time passcode. Yep. And Terry, what else?
The UTF or Universal Second Factor. And I'm not sure if I totally understand what that means, but I have it in my notes. Is that where we're basically leveraging like Google's Authenticator or Microsoft's a different authenticator app?
I thought the UTF was more like the hardware-based tokens, like the security.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Tokens.
Yeah, the hardware.
USB sticks. Yeah.
USB sticks. Okay, so we know hardware, we know emails. Somebody's already mentioned login flows, one-time passcode. What if your user doesn't have their mobile device and they need to do a high assurance session? What can we do for them?
Say no.
Well, that's where the email.
You Krispy Kreme.
Yeah,
that's where the
Exactly.
Yeah, that's where the email code would work. So they wouldn't have to have their mobile device to get an email.
Okay, what if they don't have an email either? The only thing they can get to is the Salesforce app, and they really need to get to a high assurance part of the app. What's the other option you as an admin can give them? Hint, it's on the user page. And
It's on the what page?
It's on the user's profile page.
Yeah, you can I thought it sent them a code, but
or does it email them the code? I thought it showed you.
That's what I thought. I thought it emailed.
Yeah, I think it emailed
okay.
the code.
When you said
so
no
they need their email. All right. Well, all right. We'll have to give them email then. But yeah, basically the temporary code lasts 1 to 24 hours, and they keep that as their two-factor. Okay. Anything else on this? Any other mechanisms we've missed? All right. Let's move on. Risks and mitigation strategies. I think we've covered this, and a lot of these are all straight from the exam guide, but a lot of them are similar. So if there's nothing new here, we can move on. Anything else we've missed here?
I don't think so.
Okay, let's move on. AAA authentication. Let's talk about specifically authentication. What is authentication and what Salesforce features can help with authentication? Satish?
Yeah, single sign-on.
Okay. And Terry, what is authentication?
Authentication is authentication or authorization. It's identifying who the person is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jeff, what other authentication mechanisms are available besides single sign-on?
I mean, there's through identity providers, it's just your username and password. Couldn't find who you are.
Okay. David, anything else about authentication?
App, you can use the app to authenticate.
You can use the app to authenticate. Yep. Brenda, anything else?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, let's move on. Authorization. Brenda, we'll start with you.
Sure. So authorization is, how the identity provider is determining that somebody has, that somebody should have access to a particular thing, right? So where authentication is determining who they are, authorization is saying what is that person allowed to do.
Yep. Okay, and Pavitra, what is one way we can do authorization in Salesforce?
Through through the profiles and permission sets.
Okay, profiles, permission sets. Satish, what else do we have available for authorization?
OAuth for connected apps, where we can authorize, where users can authorize applications.
Okay, Terry, anything else?
I don't have anything else.
Okay, Jeff?
Sharing rules.
Sharing rules. That's a good one. David, anything else?
No, ma'am.
Okay, let's move on. David, you're next. Accounting. What is it?
Read the question again. I'm sorry. I'm brain farting right now.
Okay.
I'm literally falling asleep.
No, that's fine. Brenda, what's define accounting? We keep landing on you for definitions. I'm not sure how that's happening.
Yeah, I'm actually like completely blanking as well because I've been so focused on authorization and authentication.
Right.
That
Well,
I
that's
forgot
what
about
we do for
accounting.
we go back to the stuff we did 6 weeks ago and see if we remember any of it.
Is accounting the just the logging
Yeah.
of who
Yeah.
signed in?
Keeping track of what people have
Keeping
done.
track of what they're doing.
Makes sense.
Okay. John, welcome to the party. We're going to throw you right into the mix here. Name one Salesforce feature we can use for accounting.
A Salesforce feature that we can use for accounting.
Yeah, and not accounting as in number crunching, but accounting as in keeping track of what the user's doing.
Salesforce Shield.
Okay.
I mean,
All right, well-
there's a mountain of data there.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the setup audit log. See if anybody's changing the environment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Pavitra, anything else?
Login history, audit trails.
Okay. Satish, anything else?
Transaction security.
Oh, very good. Okay, I'll open it up to the floor. What else have we missed?
Event
You
monitoring.
can also go to session management.
Oh,
Open setup.
okay, event monitoring, session management. Anything else?
Does field history fall into this?
I think so.
Yeah.
You can see who did what. And the event logs, of course, as John mentioned in Shield. Okay, let's move on to the app launcher. What, did somebody say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that for the OAuth, right, we have the connected app usage where we can also see not quite accounting, but who's having access. So
Okay. Cool. All right, app launcher. This is a broad statement. So we could go in all sorts of different directions here. So when and how to implement app launcher. Where were we in the mix? Terry, I think we were back to you.
App launcher can be used to basically take you into other applications within your organization.
Okay, Jeff, what else?
It can also hook up to external. connections you make all within the same place.
Yeah. All right, David, what do we need to know about setting up an app launcher for a user?
If it's connected apps, you have to have all the security settings for single sign-on, or whether they're using a SAML.
Okay. Brenda, what else?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of speaking broadly, like an app can be something that is within your Salesforce environment. It could be a managed package. It could be a connected app. It could be all sorts of different things. And so you can assign the apps to profile or permission sets. And then as mentioned, if it's a connected app or anything that requires authenticating to that application in some way, shape, or form, then that's part of the connected app setup process.
All right, and I'm putting this one to the floor. I'm not going to pick on anyone for this one, but what setting do you need to have on the connected app for it to show up on the app launcher?
Is it the my domain?
Nope.
I'm looking for it. Let's see.
Yeah.
I'll give you a little hint. You need a starting point in order to show a connected app in an app launcher.
Ah, got it.
Start URL.
Point. Yeah, start URL for the and same thing for mobile.
Yep, got to have a start URL, otherwise it doesn't show up. Anything more? Any gotchas? Any important tidbits or considerations anybody else has for app launcher? All right, let's move on.
I guess App Launcher could be just a place where you could just have links to applications, but if you set up the single sign-on with the connected apps, then it will also provide you that seamless experience with single sign-on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, delegated authentication. What are the configuration requirements for delegated authentication? Who were we on? Terry, back to you.
I knew that was coming to me. Oh man. Describe the configuration requirements. What, can I pass and come back?
Sure, Jeff.
All right, so it's basically we're outsourcing the authentication. I'm looking through to see what else to say here. So I mean, it's a different. It's the other way of doing it versus SAML. So rather than being through a web browser, I think it uses REST calls.
Okay, REST or SOAP?
SOAP.
Okay, because I was thinking it was SOAP. I saw SOAP calls a lot when there was questions around delegated authentication on the exam. I'm thinking it's SOAP, but I actually haven't looked back. David, what do you want to add to this?
The requirements, it is SOAP. I do remember that part. Obviously, you need single sign-on settings. It's only HTTPS.
Okay.
If I remember correct.
Okay. Brenda, is this automatically available in Salesforce?
No, you have to log a case and have them enable it for the org.
Okay. John, anything else on configuring delegated authentication?
Not really.
Okay. Anything else from anybody? I think we have a couple more questions on delegated.
I have two more things that it's LDAP based, or I guess
Okay.
tokens, and it's authentication only, so there is no provisioning or no authorization.
Okay. Only identity. All right. Let's move on. Oh, look, more delegated authentication. What are the components of a delegated authentication solution? David, we come to you.
The components again, it's let's see. You got to build a web service, if I remember correct. Reading through there, they support Apache, and they support Windows. Was it the WSGL or something like that exe file for setting it up?
Okay. For delegated. Okay. Brenda, what are, so we have our SOAP service that makes the call out to Salesforce or to the provider. What else do we need?
Well, you have to, not sure. You have to like enable the permissions, I think, for the user.
Good point. How is that different from federated authentication?
I have no idea. Don't know.
We'll throw that out to the group because there is a distinct difference between managing delegated authentication and managing federated authentication.
I don't know if this answers your question, but this is the one that returns either the true or false. You either have access or you don't.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Can I limit federated authentication to a subset of users? And by federated, I mean SAML based or social sign-on. Can I limit it to a subset of my user base?
Yes.
Yeah.
How would you?
Actually, you can't. Well, the only way you do it is they log into the regular URL, not go to the domain for SAML. Whereas with delegated, there is on the profile, there's a profile or user, there is a single sign-on enabled, so you can do it by individual.
Yeah, so you can do it by profile or perm set. For delegated, but for federated, when you have it on the login page, theoretically anybody can use it. Now, whether they're actually connected to Google, that's a whole separate story. But you can't say, okay, you're allowed to log in this way, but you're not. Delegated does let you do that. And we're missing one component of delegated authentication. We talked about, okay, we got to make a call out to Salesforce, and then what are we sending to Salesforce? What's returning? Who's holding the identity information?
It is a backend service, right? So it's LDAP, right? I think
Right.
you mentioned this before.
Yeah, and I think on the exam they call this like the identity store.
I see.
And does it have any inputs on what identity store versus identity provider? What's the difference? I kind of got a bit confused on that one.
Active Directory probably is the identity store.
Okay. All right. Anything more on delegated authentication on this screen? I think there's another one coming. All right. The risks of implementing delegated authentication. Who are we on? Pavitra, we haven't heard from you in a while. Unless you're talking and we're muted.
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Anything on risks? We'll open this up to the floor. There's one major risk you have to remember for the exam.
So there's like a 10-second window that stays open, so you've got to make sure your clock is up to date or you'll never get within the time period. That's one of the things I had down as a problem.
All right. There's another one.
The service should be available for Salesforce, right?
Yeah. I didn't explicitly see this written out anywhere, but I've seen it in multiple write-ups of people that have taken the exam, and they said one of the risks is your password is being transmitted over the internet, and the service and you're basically trusting the custom service that's doing that to protect the password, and you're kind of leaving that in the hands of the service. So there is that potential risk if the service isn't securing the password, then it could be intercepted in transit.
That's good.
All right, let's move on. Oh, SAML. The configuration requirements of SAML. David, let's start with you, if you're awake. I know it's, oh God, early on the West Coast right now. David might have dropped off. All right, Brenda, how about you?
So SAML is going to be done within, let's see, I'm trying to remember.
And for configuration requirements, we're looking at what parts of Salesforce are you going to go into?
Right.
SAML-based.
Yeah.
Single sign-on. And we can come back to you, Brenda.
Yeah,
John,
come back to me. I don't remember.
that's fine. John, take your mute button off. I'm sure you're saying brilliant things.
And that's pretty much it right there.
Yeah.
Oh God, I don't know.
Okay, Mitra, what do you got?
We enable we use single sign-on, and SAML we enabled in single sign-on.
Okay. All right. So what parts of Salesforce do we need to go to? So we have two different systems. On the identity provider, what do we have on the identity provider side to make single sign-on work?
I mean,
I'll open this up to the floor. I'm not just going to pick on you here, Pavitra.
So so if the Salesforce identity is being used, then we'd also have to set up the connected apps and the SAML configuration.
Right. So the identity provider needs to know what URL within Salesforce to come back to after they do the identity. So they need the URL on that side and Salesforce's certificate if you're actually using the certificates going back and forth.
Okay, so on the service provider side, we go to single sign-on. We provide our identity provider link. We provide our ID. We get the identity provider's certificate. What about how are we going to pass information back and forth? Where's that information getting passed?
Through the browser.
Okay, but where specifically we get a SAML message? How do we know how to interpret the SAML message or a SAML assertion?
The validator, right?
Right. Are we going to pass a username? Are we going to pass a user ID?
Oh, Federation ID. You have to define a Federation ID.
Well, does it have to be Federation ID?
I'm sorry, you have to define what you're using within the subject.
Subject type, right?
So within the subject, it's username, Federation ID, or some other aspect that both of you know how it's being passed.
That's right. Okay, so both sides have to know that. And then if the service provider says, hey, send me a Federation ID, what has to be present on the service provider side to be able to use that Federation ID?
On the user record, the Federation ID has to be entered.
That's good. Okay. What does relay state have to do with all this?
It's where you go back to in the service provider after the identity has been done. So you can deep link.
Okay. Pavitra, anything else there?
yes, same thing. Yeah.
Okay. Have we beat this horse enough, or is there more, what have we missed?
I guess there are a little bit from myself. I just have to review again, but the certificates part, right? So are there any requirements? Definitely the certificate from the ID provider, from the service provider is required for the ID provider, but the vice versa is an option, right? Whether you're going to sign the request or not, and whether you're going to, that's an option, correct?
Right, that is an option. Okay, let's move. I think there's more on SAML. Oh, look at that. High-level concepts and flows of SAML. I think we're going to get deeper into this, so I'm going to skip this unless somebody has specific things that instantly come to mind when you see this phrase.
Just remember the beer drinker's guide.
Okay.
It's super helpful. Remember what it does.
Okay, so what are the high-level concepts? What are the key words around SAML that you remember from what you've been studying and learning? What keywords where if you see them on the exam, you're going to know, oh, this question has to do with SAML. What key phrases come to mind? Nobody's got anything. How about identity provider?
Yeah, identity provider, service provider, assertion.
Okay.
But isn't that true with, so the assertion is definitely assertion, but the identity provider and the service provider can be from delegated also, right? It's not just a SAML concept. Because you just, what is your service and what is your identity, and then how do those talk?
That's true. That's true. Okay, let's see if the next one. Okay, distinguish the difference between identity provider initiated SAML and service provider initiated SAML, and when to use each. David, are you with us? No, I think David is off to other things. Okay, so John, pick one of these flows and tell us when a good time to use it is.
So let's see. Identity provider initiated SAML is things like if you're using like what we're doing at work. We have Okta that controls access to the Salesforce org, and so people can go to Okta. They have that little dashboard. It's like it has a series of applications, and they can click on the application to go to the Salesforce org. So that is identity provider initiated SAML. That's what happens there. The Okta actually puts I think that begins the first step in the sequence, and I think that's really the only difference between the two. Service provider initiated would be something like if you go directly to the Salesforce org and then you want to authenticate, and it redirects you out to Okta to get authenticated and then comes back. In this case, the Salesforce org is the service provider, and so they are initiating the flow. And so that's how I understand the difference between the two.
Okay. All right. I saw several questions on the exam where they would give you like 3 different systems and say, user wants to log in here and they want to go there and they want to do this. And what's the best kind of flow to use for this? Or, who should be the identity provider? Yep. That's the kind of questions I saw. So think about that as you're studying, is like, okay, in what cases would I want one system to be the identity provider, and in what cases would I want them to be a service provider?
The largest differences I've seen in using both of them is the service provider is your domain. It's a very simple URL to give to people. The identity provider usually is a big, long, gnarly thing with your relay state on it and everything else. So it's not nearly as nice. So those are usually like buried, like you said, it within links. Your corporate page has a bunch of links that could all be identity provider initiated. All the ugliness is behind the scenes. You just click and go. Whereas if you're sending emails out to people, you want them to go somewhere, your nice domain is a much cleaner way of showing them and easier to remember.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. Describe how trust is established between an identity provider and a service provider. How do we know we can trust these people or this system?
Through the digital certificates.
Uh-huh. What kind of certificates do we need? Self-signed or CA signed?
You have both, right?
You have both. Is one or the other required?
Yeah, I think it would be required to have the CA sign one, because that's the one where it's going to be the public key is going to be publicly available or something like that.
Well, really, most of our testing that we have done in the domain in the trailheads, we have been using this the self-sign, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think from identity provider to when SAML assertion is coming from the identity provider, like that is when CA signed is required. But if you have a certification requirement from the SP to say who you are, then we don't need CA signed certificate.
Okay. So that might come up on the exam too, so keep that in mind. And let's move on. I think we talked about this. Recommend the appropriate method of SAML initiation. Who does it? Does the service provider do it, or does the identity provider do it? Again, try to find examples out on the internet where you have more than 2 systems, because with 2 systems, it's kind of easy. Okay, this is the service provider, this is the identity provider. A lot of the scenarios I saw in the exam had at least 3 systems in them, and sometimes.
So in that case, if there are more than 3 systems, is there a specific flow that's beneficial? Does somebody have any points around that?
I would just kind of look at, like in the study guide, there's a sample exam question, says something like, the users first go to Google Mail first thing in the morning, and that's the first place they log in. So for me, I would look at that as a hint of, oh, that's probably a good place to make that the identity provider, since that's the first place they go.
Got it.
I would maybe look at things like, is there one central place that they want to access all their other apps from? That would be another good time to make them an identity provider. When is a good time to make them a service provider? I'm not as clear on those. Does anybody have ideas on that?
When is it a good time to make a service provider? Well, when you need that service.
Well,
Right,
okay, but okay. So maybe what we really need to, so maybe the litmus test becomes, should this system be the identity provider? And if the answer is no, then by default, they're the service provider.
Well, wouldn't it be possible that some apps cannot serve as an identity? They only are.
Yeah, that's part of the other thing is you have to be able to know, to identify who the person is to be an identity provider. So if you don't have the capability for that, you can only be a service provider.
Yeah. And then it's a series of feature comparison. You know, Salesforce can act as this. Salesforce can act as somewhat of a poor man's ID provider or identity provider. But when you get things like ping and opt out there's a lot more features that are available and stuff like that. So you got feature comparison between the various IPs, and then also you got the cost. You know, a lot of times Salesforce can become the identity provider because it makes sense because you're already having to pay for a lot of those licenses anyway. And the only licenses you would have to add on are the ones that don't use Salesforce themselves, and you would just grab those identity licenses, stuff like that. So,
yep. And identity licenses are coming up. Okay. Anything more on how do you decide who to use as the identity provider?
Well, the other thing is, you know, as consultants, you arrive on the projects after the salespeople already have sold it to them. So it might be already a foregone conclusion by the time you arrive.
It might be. You know, maybe they're reorging. Maybe they've got a merger and they're reconsidering their identity strategy. So
I mean, the upside to the arriving and the decision's already made. You can when it goes up in smoke, you can say, "Look, I
worked with what I got." Yeah, doesn't make the client any happier, but yeah.
No, not at all.
All right, let's move on. Identity Connect. Applicable use cases for Identity Connect.
So,
Brenda, how about you? We haven't heard from you in a while. And Pavitra, you're going to be after Brenda.
Yep. So Identity Connect is the thing that really integrates with Active Directory, right? So if Active Directory is your identity provider, then Identity Connect allows you to connect that into Salesforce.
Okay. And Pavitra, what's name a cool feature about Identity Connect?
Identity Connect, you need to host it on your own server, so it is not something hosted on Salesforce. So that's something resides, like you can have it in your server. So basically, it's it can be used to sync your user information between your Active Directory and Salesforce.
Okay. And Satish, which way is the synchronization happening?
It's happening from your LDAP or Active Directory into Salesforce only one way. And I just want to bring it up that you can have multiple orgs that it can sync it into.
Yeah.
Benefits.
And good point, Terry. And if you have multiple orgs that you're syncing to, what are different ways to do that?
Actually,
production org and sandbox org?
So actually, I'm sorry. Before we leave that statement, it was my understanding Identity Connect only interfaces with Active Directory, not LDAP. Am I incorrect there?
It interfaces with Active Directory via the LDAP protocol. So LDAP is the way it communicates with Active Directory, but Active Directory that has the user information.
Yeah, it's typically any directory that supports that kind of protocol, it should be able to connect to.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, because I thought that would. I got dinged previously because I tried to use Identity Connect in an LDAP scenario. So anyway, I'll double check that. So, okay.
Yeah. But the bottom line is it's got to be Active Directory.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Gots to be Active Directory. Terry, what else can you tell us about Identity Connect?
Doesn't it sit in a DMZ environment so that it's accessible?
Okay. And Jeff, what if I wanted to use Identity Connect for a production org and a sandbox org? Could I do it with how many Identity Connect servers do I need to do that? Can I do it with one? Do I need two? Do I need more than two?
Good question. And I had the same question here on my notes. I don't have the answer. I'm going to guess you need two separate configurations within the Identity Connect.
Yeah, well, you actually need two complete separate Identity Connect installs. So you can have multiple production, like Satish said, Identity Connect can manage multiple orgs, but they all have to be either production or sandbox. You can't mix and match.
And I suspect part of the reason for that is that if you have a, generally the access in a sandbox is different. People usually grant larger security access in a sandbox than in production. So everything's being driven from the Active Directory. So how would you distinguish? You know, if your source is Active Directory, how do you distinguish? Oh, I want more rights in this environment versus the other.
Good point.
Yeah.
What if you have multiple Active Directories? How can you set it up?
It's about each Active Directory. Each Active Directory has to be the source of truth for each individual. And so you can't have the same individual across multiple Active Directories. And so as long as that is preserved, then it should be the configuration, right? It's like, I'm going to go get these people from this Active Directory, these people from that Active Directory, and I'll just spread that information out to all the Salesforce orgs that I have.
And there was a tool that combined those, but I do not remember the tool.
Yeah, it was like a global catalog or something.
Yeah. There are a couple of patterns, right? One is having the global catalog or using two different identity connects.
Yeah. So the option one is global catalog consolidates all the Active Directories and talks to one Identity Connect. And option two is every Active Directory talks to its own Identity Connect.
All right.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah, there's one cool feature about Identity Connect that I haven't found, at least in Okta. And so in Okta, when you do you're mapping the user to the Salesforce instance, and in that mapping, you assign people to different Okta groups is basically what it becomes. And so for each group, you define the Salesforce user's profile, his role, and any permission sets that he would need. But just like the whole issue within Salesforce itself, where you have where the organizations rely on profiles and just they end up with 157 different profiles because they're all just variations on a theme, tweaks and little slight differences. You end up in the same issue in Okta, in the fact that, well, I want this group to have this profile X plus permission sets 1, 2, 3, but I want this group to have profile X and permission sets 1 and 3. And so it becomes sort of a mapping nightmare in Okta. Identity Connect actually has the ability to filter off of distinct Active Directory set profile settings. So you can, within the Active Directory, you can define all kinds of attributes. And so you could actually tell Identity Connect, well, if you get this attribute, then the only change that really makes is you're going to get a permission set assignment for that user. So he could be in a totally different, they could be spread out across totally different profiles, but the attribute itself gives that sort of granularity that allows for, among other things, more granular control, more distinct control around permission sets. So as you can tell, I'm missing that right now in my.
So let's talk about that. What can you map to in Salesforce from Active Directory? We already talked profiles and permission sets, but there's additional things that you can map to.
You can, I mean, you can map roles and as well, I'm pretty sure.
And I think there was groups as well that you could map to. I don't know if anybody has the documentation up, but there might be one more. Things you might encounter on an exam. Okay. So what role does Identity Connect play in identity management?
It plays the synchronization role between the IDP and the Salesforce systems. Service. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So it's the middleman.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Anything? Let's move on. IDP and SP, anything more we need to cover on this slightly differently worded thing that we were already talking about? All right, let's move on. All right, common methods for trust connections between two systems. Didn't we have something like this earlier, like in SAML? I think we did. So what are the common methods to establish trust? What are we thinking here? What do you think? Trusted connections, what comes to mind?
Certificates.
Certs.
And what else?
SSL.
SSL, yeah. What in the connected app could be used for trust?
The the secret key.
Yeah, consumer ID and secret.
Consumer ID and secret. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? All right. Moving on. Components of an identity management solution where Salesforce is accepting identity from a third party. So what do we need to do to be able to accept identity? Brenda, you've been quiet for a bit. Let's pick on you again.
Yeah. So you have to, you have to go to the single sign-on settings and like enable it, and then right.
Okay. And then what about the on the identity provider side? Does the identity provider need to configure anything? Or do you need to do anything on the identity provider side?
I think this is what we were talking, like the identity provider needs to know like where to send the assertion or the connection that says like, yes, this is fine.
Mm-hmm.
What to use as the identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also, you need basically like the equivalent of a connected app on the identity provider that says this system is allowed to talk to me to make identity requests. So in Salesforce, that's a connected app. In Google, it's like an API key maybe that you would get or something like that. And so when you're setting up like a social sign-on, for example, we need to provide that key so that like if we're calling out to Google or we're calling out to Facebook, that it knows that, yeah, I trust you, I know about you, and it's okay for you to ask me these questions. Anything else? What else do we need? Moving on. Okay, given a scenario, recommend the appropriate authentication mechanism. So when Salesforce needs to accept third-party identity. So what use cases can you think of where it would be good to, like, let's say, have users log in through a community or have users log in through a social sign-on or through enterprise directory? Is this question too broad? Are there any like specific use cases that jump out at you that, oh yeah, in this situation, I would definitely use like social sign-on, for example?
Well, I think for a community, doing kind of social sign-on or anything, using the OpenID Connect process and OAuth would be good, right? So you're not asking them to create unique username and password, for the community.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I think a common thing to accept a third party is just what single sign-on says: your ability to define in one place for multiple applications what their identity is. So, if whatever is, you could have all the apps in your company going to one place to define who you are. So it makes it easier to set things up. I think that's why you would set it up. Why you would accept a third party is to make it easier across your entire enterprise to log into different apps.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else?
So what I'm struggling with this one and the last one. What do we mean by third party? Is that?
Well, it basically means Salesforce is not the one that validates the username and password. It just accepts an assertion from somebody else that says, yeah, this is who they say they are.
So that could be even Active Directory.
It could be Active Directory, yeah.
Okay. All right. I was thinking that it had to be some common public type deal like Google or social sign-on, but I think that's why I was getting confused.
Yeah, no, it could be Active Directory, could be some homegrown username password system that you've created. I don't know why you would do that, but I don't know. Good. If it talks in the right protocols, it could. All right, licenses. So this was like way back at the beginning of our study group. So Pavitra, tell us about some special license types for identity.
We have external identity license. It's more like a community license, but it has identity related features also into it.
Okay, and how does it differ from a community license? What doesn't it have that a community license does have?
I forgot.
Okay, anybody remember?
Community has access to cases.
Uh-huh.
And
I was actually kind of surprised. I think one of the questions on my exam actually dealt with Community Plus licenses. So make sure you know the difference between Community and Community Plus and what each one does.
That's primarily reporting, right?
As I recall, yeah, reporting was Community Plus, and Community does not have reporting. But make sure you check out those grids. So depending on what features the customer needs, it might be Community, it might be Community Plus, it might be external identity. What other special license types besides external identity is there?
Well, there's just the regular identity license, which is used if somebody isn't like a normal user of Salesforce and they're not in the community, but you're using Salesforce as the identity provider, then you can issue those identity licenses intended for internal users versus external.
Okay. Anything else on licenses?
I guess could they have questions on which licenses would have access to what objects? Like, for example,
the questions I got didn't say like, hey, a user has this license, what can they access? What I got was, there are users that have these specific requirements on what they need and what kind of licenses should they have based on that.
Got it.
Isn't there an external only identity license as well?
There is. And that would be like for the communities. So yeah, they can update like their contact and account information, but they can't open a support case.
Okay.
Okay. Licenses, last call. Moving on. Login flows. What's the purpose of login flows? We've covered this before, but what are some use cases where you'd want to use a login flow?
If you want to customize the login experience so that you can say bring everybody to a specific page to provide information.
Okay. Yep, that's one good use case. What else, Satish?
Terms and conditions. Let's say you want for somebody to accept them, or maybe you want to collect some data that's missing for a set of users.
Okay, Terry. What else?
I think we hit the ones that I remembered.
Okay, Jeff. Anything else?
No.
Okay.
I can't think of anything additional.
You can do a customized two-factor authentication.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so especially if you're doing hardware-based two-factor authentication, where there's not really a good way in Salesforce to do that out of the box, but a login flow you could do it with. Okay, let's move on. Oh, our favorite topic, OAuth.
Just a question on the previous one.
Yeah.
Natalya. So what was the answer on why we would need a customized flow for two-factor versus using Salesforce's two-factor?
Well, Salesforce's two-factor uses the Salesforce app or Salesforce Authenticator app, which is like, a one-time code or, you approve the request and you get the little green checkbox. But let's say your company wants to use like a hardware token or like a fingerprint USB stick or something. I don't know of a way out of the box that Salesforce can do that. So for that, you'd want to do a login flow.
Got it. Thank you.
And, have them say, put your thumb on the USB stick so we can read your fingerprint, or type in a code that we just emailed you or something along those lines.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, back to OAuth. We can't get away from it. We're going to go down the list here. There's all these things listed. So Terry, talk about scopes for us.
Scope isn't that the one that determines what they can do or what they have access to? There was a whole variety of different
There is one.
settings
Yeah.
for that.
Okay. Do you remember any of the scopes? Because you will need to know them.
Not off the top of my head, I don't know.
All right, Jeff, you remember any scopes?
Yeah,
And what-
so there's ability to access visual force. There's an all, which is everything except refresh token. Refresh token's one. Open ID to get the ID. Actually, I think you always get the ID of who the user is. Web, data. Those are the ones I can think of right off the bat.
I don't remember data. I remember API.
API was the one that provides the data, right? API.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and then the one you mentioned open ID and then you changed it to ID. There's actually, those are two separate scopes. So ID is kind of the bare minimum that you can get, and it's included with every other scope. Open ID is a very specially formatted ID in that open with the the JWT format that Open ID expects.
And you don't get the refresh token with the full, so you have to have a separate.
Right, you got to specifically.
You have to state that specifically, yes.
Okay. All right. I'm trying to think. I think that's all the scope. So we had web. Somebody said visual force, ID, full API. What's the difference between web and visual force?
Isn't there also a Chatter API separate?
Oh yeah, Chatter API. Good point. So what's the difference between web and visual force?
With visual force, they can only access visual force pages, right? And so if it's web, then they could access potentially the rest of Salesforce, but visual force, they can only gain access to the custom visual force pages.
Okay, and what's the difference between API and Chatter API?
API includes the Chatter API. But
Yep.
Right. API is all the APIs, whereas Chatter is that one specifically.
Okay. David, are you back with us?
Actually, Natalya?
Yeah.
I have to drop off.
Okay.
But I wanted to say thank you very much for everything. This has been a fabulous refresher and study, and I appreciate it tremendously. So,
Well, thank you. Good luck on your exam when you schedule it.
yeah, it'll be sometime in January.
Cool. Very cool. All right. What were we talking about?
APIs, right? Chatter.
APIs, scope, secrets. All right. Let's talk about secrets. What's a secret and why do we care?
So the secret is like the kind of random string or something that is what really enables the connection between the application and the authorization server. So it's like the thing that binds them together is that they both know the secret that nobody else is going to know.
Okay.
The other thing about that is it's used only in the web server flow and only when the service provider or the client can really secure it.
Good point. And there's more slides on the specific flows where we can talk about the joy of the different flows. All right, Pavitra, what do we use tokens for in OAuth?
Basically, we have these access tokens. Basically, that can be used to get the refresh tokens. So they kind of know, instead of storing the user ID, basically we use these refresh tokens. So we are not actually storing the actual user ID in that.
Okay. And what's the access token? What is that? Why do we care about access tokens?
The access tokens is the one where when we do the service calls, that is what identifies you are already authenticated, and that's how Salesforce knows that you can. That's how it identifies the user.
Okay. So what was some of the presenters use this, that there's, when you think of an access token, what's another name that might help you remember what it's for?
Session ID is what.
Session ID.
Yeah, it's a session ID. Okay, so that's the access token. What's a refresh token? Pavitra touched on this already. Satish?
Yeah, refresh token is the one where you can get a new access token because access tokens are usually timed by session. Session times out as access token expires, so you need the refresh token to get a new access token.
Okay, and then Terry, if a token is revoked, what does that mean?
That means that the session is basically going to end. They'd have to re-authenticate.
Okay. Cool. All right, let's move on. Here we go. Now we go into OpenID Connect. That slide is out of order. Okay, OpenID Connect. What is it, Jeff?
Give me a second here. So it's a way to enable social sign-on or mobile apps to get in. It's another, I guess, means in order to connect through outside of OAuth.
Okay, and this one confused me for a long time. So they say, you know, OpenID is a combination of SAML and OAuth. And I was like, well, what do you mean it uses OAuth? It's not using OAuth. But what it is you're using OAuth to say that, yes, Salesforce, you can have my basic information from Facebook. That's where the OAuth part comes in. It's giving Salesforce, for example, Salesforce is service provider. Facebook is my identity provider using social sign-on. The OAuth isn't to get access to Salesforce features. The OAuth is to get access to my Facebook identity information.
So what I would want to add to that is OpenID is a standard that supports both authentication and authorization, whereas OAuth is just supporting authorization by design. Although you can, you know, sort of, but by design it's supposed to be only authorization. And
Right.
OpenID supports both. It sends the identity, open identity, where we can get more information about the user.
And then the OAuth is the user saying, here's how much information you can have about me. You know, do I let you have just my name information about Facebook, or am I going to let you post on my wall on Facebook? Okay. Anything more on OpenID Connect?
So one of the notes I have here is that it really is SAML for RESTful web services. So whereas SAML needs the browser to do it, this is kind of how you do a similar type thing, but through REST calls.
That's a good point. And it uses JWT tokens, right? So it's instead of JSON web tokens instead of SAML.
Right.
Okay. Final thoughts on OpenID Connect? All right, social sign-on. What else? What more do we want to talk about with social sign-on? We've covered this somewhat.
So we'd have to implement these are just concepts or get deep into the social sign-on.
Well, it just says explain. I don't know that you have to go into the nitty-gritty, but you know, let's talk about what, like, let's say what social networks are supported out of the box, where I don't even have to do anything special.
The Facebook and the Google and LinkedIn. There are a few of those that are supported out of the box, and it supports the OpenID Connect providers on top of it.
Yeah.
And you can do custom authentication providers. I believe there's some way to do that.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about provisioning later on. What else is important to know about social sign-on with Salesforce? All right, well, let's talk about communities then. So how can we authenticate users in communities? Should I just pick on somebody? I'll pick on Terry. Our numbers are small. That means everybody gets lots of speaking opportunities.
I assume what we're asking here is like social sign-on would be an example.
Yeah. And what other options do we have?
You can enable users to self-register.
Okay.
Right.
Self-registration. Can I, as, let's say, a sales rep, create a community login for a user? Or for a contact?
If you have permission, I think it's manage external users or something like that. Or you can do a delegated admin for other users to be able to add or change community users.
Okay. All right. What about login pages? What options are available for login pages? And that might be the next question, actually. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's registration, but let's talk about login. What kind of login pages can we create? Can we have in communities?
You can have like the kind of standard one that you can customize with like an image and kind of color scheme. Or I think you can do like a complete custom login page through Visualforce.
Yeah, and there's another one, I think it's called Login Discovery, where they just put in like an email or a phone number and we figure out like whether they registered through Facebook or through Twitter or through LinkedIn. And then we send them to the correct page based on that. There's a fourth one too, but I don't remember what the fourth one is. If anybody thinks of it. I remember there were 4 options in the drop-down. So let's talk about capabilities of customizing registration experience. So, what can we do about self-registration or auto-provisioning or branding? Let's do one at a time. Let's talk about branding. What can we brand on our login pages? If we're just using like the standard page, we're not writing a Visualforce page, we're just using Salesforce's out-of-the-box login page, but what can we still customize on it?
Colors and logos.
Okay.
The right-hand side, it's a URL that you can provide.
Okay. All right. Self-registration, what options are available there?
Isn't that either on or off?
Yeah, I was going to say, like.
And you can associate them to a particular account ID when they self-register.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can associate it to an account ID. What if you leave the default account blank? What happens? Assuming you have person accounts enabled, what happens?
Can you create person accounts?
Oh yes, that's exactly what happens.
Is that and again, it's hard for me to remember how the configuration was done, but is that the out-of-the-box configuration where we don't have to create an authentication provider, or?
Yes. Yeah, you just set that up when you create the community. It's like, I believe it's literally a checkbox that says like enable self-registration, and then you can provide kind of a default account for them to get associated with, or as Natalya said, if you leave it blank and you have person accounts, then I'll register and create person account records.
Yeah.
And you also need to assign default, is it default profile, I believe? I think it's a default profile, yeah, that they get if they self-register. And then what if we want to do like some special stuff when they self-register? Is there a way to do that?
We can have custom Visualforce pages for self-registration.
Yeah. Well, what's a registration handler? What does that do?
It's basically code to decide what you're going to do with the parameters that are passed back, or you could do some logic to decide what profile or how to attach it to an account or anything else. So it gives you the ability to make decisions on the information coming in and what to do with the user.
Do they get into like what the create method or the update method has, or what data or parameters? Do you get into that level? Or?
I did not see anything like that on my exam. Doesn't mean it's not out there. It just means I didn't see it.
Yeah.
So I can't remember how big the pool of questions is, but you just get a random subset of that. And I don't know if you guys have had this. I've had this on an exam where I basically had effectively the same question 5 times, where it was just worded slightly differently, but it was almost identical. Like, didn't we just cover this?
Love it when that happens.
Yeah, as long as you know the answer.
If you know the answer. If you don't, then it's bad.
If you don't know the answer, then you kind of split it 50-50, so you figure at least half of them will be right. Okay, I actually had a question had something to do with like customizing logins versus customizing password resets or something, and what can you customize. So I don't remember. Yeah, that one kind of threw me for a loop.
Yeah, I think you can customize all those pages. You can customize the logout page. You can customize the forgot password, reset password page. I think any of the steps to kind of logging in, I believe you can customize Community Builder.
Yeah.
With community logins, are we able to send them through a login flow as well?
I think so.
That's
Yes,
good.
we can do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the login flow is attached to a profile.
That's true.
So,
okay.
Good point. So yes, you can. Yeah, so play around on the community page, find out what you can and can't customize and the different ways you can do it, because you'll probably be asked something about it. Okay, so provisioning, user lifecycle management techniques. And this is, again, use cases. When would you want to allow like just-in-time provisioning or automated provisioning? In what scenarios would we want to do that? Any ideas?
Yeah. So there is that just-in-time provisioning, and we can enable that. And there is a handler, either we can use the handler, right, to provision the user based on what we get from the response.
Okay.
So isn't this an option both on the SAML SSL based integration as well as the? I'm trying to figure out what the places where this is applicable.
I think almost anywhere you can log in, you can control the login, you can auto provision, like through communities, through single sign-on.
And on the connected apps, right? Because when we use the SAML on the connected app as well.
Yes.
So there's a provision. I'm not sure if I'm confusing myself. There's a provisioning into Google or the external pro apps.
Well, I mean, there's a provisioning if Google is our identity provider and we say you can authenticate with Google and come to us, and if we don't know who you are, we'll create an account for you. But I mean, we can't tell Google, hey, whether to create an account or not. That's something controlled on Google's side.
I thought if you in the OAuth connected apps, when we are having a connected app, let's say in the case where we have Salesforce and let's say we have Google as a connected app, and either you just authorize the app to just come and get the data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if there is a connected app that has a user interface where you're getting into Google and these users are not in Google, there's a way to sort of provision that using SAML, but I'm confusing myself at this point, I guess.
Well, the connected app is the external app coming into Salesforce to get something. And I think there is, and David covered this, I think on Wednesday, where you can provision there is a user provisioning option on the connected app page.
Yeah.
But that will provision a user inside Salesforce. It won't provision them in the other system. Because we can't control what the other system does, right? We can only control what Salesforce does. Although I suppose on some level we can control. But my understanding is that provisioning on the connected app policy is to provision them inside Salesforce. And I don't even know how that would work. Like, they come to us, they're a connected app. So they're a service provider. They're coming to us, and we'd have to be the identity provider at that point, because otherwise I don't see how that would work.
Okay.
So, okay. Hi, Igor. Welcome to the party. Oh, he joined, and there he is. Okay. Welcome to the party, Igor. All right. Provisioning continued. Recommend the appropriate method for provisioning users. So this goes into how are you going to do it? So let's talk about when would we want to use, like, let's say, Identity Connect versus SAML just in time. And some of this, I guess, will depend on how the scenario is written. Like if they say you're authenticated with Active Directory, well, okay, well, we're not going to use SAML for that. We're probably going to use Identity Connect. When would be a case when we'd want to provision users over SOAP or REST API? Igor, you're a bit of an identity expert. Can you think of a use case where we'd want to do the provisioning over API instead of like any of our built-in provisioning options?
I would think there's some cases where obviously just-in-time provisioning, Identity Connect is very flexible, but like just-in-time provisioning has some limitations in terms of what it can transfer in terms of variable fields from the user. And sometimes there are requirements where you need to bring in data from some other records or maybe some other fields that are not possible to do just-in-time provisioning, and you need to push them to the IDP. So that's probably where you would leverage something like this, I would guess.
Just to add to that, I think I'm thinking in terms of the exam as well, is maybe if you don't have Active Directory and you can't use Identity Connect because of that limitation. You have some legacy, store where users are, and then user information is there, and then you need to provision that into Salesforce, and just JIT doesn't support all of it. Then you would have to use the APIs, right?
Good point.
Right, I think along those lines. So like the SAML just-in-time, the provisioning occurs when someone attempts to log in through SAML and we determine the user doesn't exist. And I think with Identity Connect, it's really keeping in sync your Active Directory and say your users, which doesn't necessarily indicate that a login has occurred, but just keeping things updated. So like, was just mentioned, if you've got another system that is keeping track of who your employees are, and they should all have access to something, then when a new employee comes on, you'd want to push out a call to say, okay, create a user ID for this person so they can get in.
Okay. What about, and we were just talking about this, user provisioning for connected apps. Igor, I couldn't think of a good scenario where we would want to do this. I don't know, and nobody else in the group had any thoughts on this either, other than when would you use this? So I don't know if you can shed some new light on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what would be the good use case for this, since typically for the connected app, you kind of already, like with the mobile or web apps that are authenticating themselves to get access to, you probably already have a user in Salesforce. So the app itself does not have a user anyways. It's basically relying on Salesforce to provide that session and the communication. So I don't know what that use case would look like.
Okay. I guess just know that it's possible to set up a connected app to auto provision, because I did have a question where that would be the options.
Actually, something came to mind. I think what that might be meaning is that connected apps is often used in SSO and SAML, right? Like with communities and other things. So there is actually relevant, because there you have basically a system that doesn't have a user and you need to provision a new user and push different credentials to them. So that's where connected app would probably play a role, because you would identify your another, a service provider, let's say, as a connected app in Salesforce, and then you would push a user in it. I mean, that would be one of the use cases that I could see.
Okay.
But that will be SSO. It will essentially, that's not necessarily OAuth, which would be like a web app authentication, but the SSO scenario where you're just leveraging that to propagate users across to be able to do seamless sign-on and deep linking to these systems.
Okay. All right, let's move on. OAuth, our favorite web server authentication flow. So the next set of slides, they're all OAuth flows. The details are the same on every single flow. Explain the high-level concept and the flow, and talk about when would you want to use this flow. So web server authentication flow, what's the good use case for this? Savitra, you've been awfully quiet lately.
Yeah. So web server authentication flow would work like if you are on a third-party application, and if you want to access some of the information from Salesforce and use if the user has logged in web, so through the you can redirect them to Salesforce to authorize and allow that user to log into Salesforce to get some information on behalf of that user.
Okay, so when would we want to use a web server flow? What are the classic use cases when this is the right one to use versus like one of the other ones?
It's okay.
This goes back to the hint probably is a secret.
The consumer secret. So yeah, it talks about, in documentation it says, if the client can protect the consumer secret. What does that mean in English?
That the app is hosted on a secure server. Right.
But it doesn't have it written in code that anybody can get to. But let's say it's a configuration piece that only admins can go in and configure. So from that standpoint, it's protected from the general people on that server.
Right. Okay. And what's how many kind of jumps are involved in the process here before you can get an access token? What's the high level process?
You try that. So isn't there a auth request first, which follows by the actual actual access token request?
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, important thing to know here is it's a two-part process. So the user first authorizes the app. That gives the app permission to then go get a token. And so then we go and we say, hey, this user says I can do this. Can I please have an access token? And then the token endpoint says, yes, here you go. And now we're happy and we can move on. Do we get refresh tokens in a web server flow?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Okay, so most important thing here is be able to protect the consumer secret. So when would you not want to use this flow? Because we can't protect the secret.
Single page applications, multiple devices.
Okay. And also desktop. And I saw that like anything like JavaScript, if the application is doing JavaScript where, you can bring up the JavaScript and look at it, that would be a very bad place to use this because you're exposing the secret. And it said mobile, but then Igor said, I thought at one point that mobile actually is secure and you could use this, but all the documentation seems to say, if you're using mobile, don't use web server auth flow.
I guess
Well,
there are.
the web server flow is not. I think this user agent is being used, but it's very similar to web server flow for the mobile, where the secret is still stored on the device. It is still with the app. You just can't easily get to it, right?
Okay. That's what you're saying, that, yeah, you can't easily get to it. Okay, so let's talk about the user agent flow since we just did. How is this different from the web server flow? What are the key differences between them?
Desktop or mobile.
Mm-hmm. Or JavaScript.
JavaScript.
And then what is not passed in this one that does get passed with the web server flow?
Secret.
Secret.
The client secret is not passed. And is this a one-part or a two-part process to get the token?
One part, right?
One.
Yep, they provide their credentials, they authorize, they get the token. So boom, we're done. Do we get a refresh token?
Yep.
No.
You
We
do.
do.
Yes.
Yes.
Because
Yes, there's a refresh token.
yeah.
It's required for a lot of the apps for that. That's one of the advantages to using it.
One of the ways to just keep that in mind is that it doesn't make sense for us to authenticate every time, especially for user agent devices, right? So we want them to constantly refresh the access token.
Refresh token flow. What do we use this for? Let's start this. How is the user involved in this?
Only if it expires.
They aren't.
They aren't.
Satish is actually more correct. Well, I know where you're getting. What were you going to say, Satish?
Yeah, I was going to say when the refresh token, there's a policy where you can expire it after some time or immediately expire it. But yeah, so if it expires, then user would have to be identified again and authorized.
And otherwise, the user isn't there and doesn't care. Okay. So how does this work if there's no user involved? How do we get it? What do we do in a refresh token flow?
Well, so there had to have been a previous flow that allowed you to get a session ID to get in and then give you the refresh token that can then be used on subsequent. So this is a follow-on to a previous authentication mechanism to get the initial refresh token.
Yep. And what scope would you have had to send to get a refresh token? What scope?
Refresh token.
Yep. You would have had to request the refresh token scope. Okay, what else do we need to know here? So this is the system. What is this? How does this? So the system is doing what here?
It's passing the refresh token to the token endpoint to get a new access token.
That's right. Okay, anything more on refresh tokens? All right, SAML bearer assertion flow. Why is this one similar to a refresh token flow?
Previous authorization.
Mm-hmm.
It has to have had a previous authentication, in this case a SAML, that you're reusing to now go through a second time.
Well, just want
Is
to,
that
so Jeff, just for my insanity, I get confused here. Maybe somebody can help me out, but it's the previous authorization, right? So where you actually go and say for this app, the users are authorized, but a previous session also has to be established, like an authentication.
Well, it's the authorization piece. So this is strictly the user has gone in at some point and says, yes, this client app is allowed to talk to you on behalf of me. And then they go away and the user just doesn't need to be there anymore.
Yeah, but the session is a fresh established session, isn't it, through this flow?
Well, this flow establishes the session, yeah. So it sends that SAML assertion. It says, hey, I am acting on behalf of this user who has already told you I'm allowed to do this. Please give me an access token.
Right.
And then
the way to authorize and the way to get the do that authentication is through that, like you said, Natalya, is the SAML assertion that we sign and send.
And what else? What else needs to happen in this kind of flow that doesn't need to happen in most of the other flows? What other component is required here?
digital signature?
Yes, must have digital signature. Okay, and then so let's talk about JOT bearer token flow. What's the difference between this and SAML bearer?
It's just it's the same. The difference is that this is JSON versus SAML.
Yep. And other than that, they're exactly the same. So one's sending SAML assertions, one's sending JOT assertions. So I suppose if you're using an OpenID Connect provider, you'd probably be using the JOT bearer flow. Use cases for this one?
When user is not involved, more like a API calls to Salesforce to get information.
Yep, that's correct. So like server to server communication. So you manually go in, you authorize it once, and from there the servers just talk to each other. And they trust each other because of that certificate signature.
And you actually don't have to authorize it once if in your managed policy you tell it that approved profiles can do it, and then you assign it to one of those profiles.
Ah.
There's a point on that I was just reading, and I thought it was interesting to bring up in the group, is that there are two settings there. One is the users can self-authorize versus the admins authorize. Actually, having the admins authorize is much more secure because they can restrict that to profiles or permission. If you say user can self-authorize, you cannot restrict that to a profile or a permission.
Right. We've set up several of these JWTs, and we set it up to a single profile that has a single user that logs in as a system ID in order to have that connection between the two servers. And that's the only one that can use that when we've done this.
Okay. Yeah, very good point that you can restrict that by saying admin approved users. So very cool. Let's move on. SAML assertion flow. Is this one different?
Yeah. So I remember this one. There's no authorization involved in this.
Well, it's authentication, but it's specifically used when? Like, what do you have to have basically set up? Like, if you just use Salesforce as an identity provider, can you use this flow?
No.
Okay.
Well, you need a SAML response. So you need some kind of identity that's given you a valid SAML response.
Okay, and then what are you going to do with that response in this flow?
You're actually then going to call the SSO endpoint to use that response to log you in.
Okay, and then how is this different from just a user logging into a web page using SSO?
So if you use the SSO, it then transfers you over to the identity provider. The identity provider creates the SAML response, sends it back. You then use that response to get in. In this case, you've already gotten that response from somewhere. So you now just apply that to the login and go directly in. It doesn't take you over to the identity provider because you somehow have gotten the response.
Right.
That allows you to get in.
Is it the SSO for APIs, or from my exam perspective?
Yeah, it's SSO for APIs. That's kind of the key one you want to remember on this one, I think. is, where regular like IDP SP flows is browser based, users are interacting with the website. This is API based. So there might not, after the initial authorization call or authentication call, there might not be a web interface involved. It's just the systems talking to each other.
The key here is where do you get a SAML response?
Yeah.
Not through the browser stuff with the normal IDPs. That's not straightforward.
Yeah, but yeah, as Satish said, this is basically single sign-on for APIs. I like that definition. All right, device authentication. What's this one for? Terry, you've been awfully silent.
Yeah, it's on purpose for these ones. All right. I think this is the Internet of Things type concept where it's a device that doesn't necessarily have a user interface that is seeking to authenticate.
Yeah. So I always think of like the Roku, or if I'm on my Roku and I want to connect to like a service that I pay for, and it says go to this website and type in this code. And so I bring up my web browser, or I bring up my phone and I go to the website, it tells me, and I put in the code, and then the device is happy.
Okay.
So yeah, think of this as setting up your TV. This is setting up your entertainment system or your Xbox game or something. Let's see, determine the most appropriate flow type to recommend. So that's what this one's for. I guess the one important point to note on this flow is the device is sitting there and it's like it keeps asking Salesforce, hey, did they authorize yet? Did they authorize me yet? Hey, did they authorize me now? How about now? Did they authorize me now? And so it's sitting there waiting for the user to go to the browser because it can't watch you, we think. It can't watch you open up a web browser to go to the website to punch in the code. It has to keep checking back until you finally put the code in, and then finally Salesforce says, stop bugging me. Yes, they put in the code. Yes, they're allowing you to do what you want to do. Any more questions, thoughts here? All right, asset token flow, similar to Internet of Things, but what's different about this one?
Generate that asset ID, I guess, the asset.
Yeah, so we've got two tokens here. Token that we don't have in any other flows. Anybody remember the name of it?
Is it the asset token?
Author token and asset tokens.
The actor token.
What's that? Can you please repeat that?
Or is it the asset token or the author or
actor token?
Yeah, the actor token.
Actor token. Okay.
So we have the access token, which gives us access to the data, and then we have the actor token, which I'm still not really clear what that thing is. I kind of feel like it represents the device itself.
Yeah, doesn't that lock it into a device so that it knows which one? Because you're essentially going to come into Salesforce and update potential records. So is that link that says I'm talking to that sensor versus another sensor?
Right. And then key points here. What's the use case for this one versus the device flow?
It's again for Internet of Things, wherein the device want to talk to the device or device backends want to talk to Salesforce, and it's mostly used with the asset object of Service Cloud. So we can know basically the asset object on the Service Cloud is involved here.
Yep, there's the keywords. So asset and Service Cloud. And so think of this as, like Jeff said, this is a sensor sitting out there, and when there's a problem on the sensor, it wants to communicate that back to Salesforce, back to Service Cloud, maybe open a case or something. Versus, I just want to set up an entertainment system, and I want to, I don't need to talk to Salesforce to be able to watch streaming movies. I just need, my device just needs to know that I have an Amazon account and my subscription is still good. Okay, questions here? Username password flow. What is it? Why is it scary?
You're giving somebody else your login credentials.
Yeah. Yeah, and why else is it scary?
The credentials are transmitted over the wire.
Yeah, and the token comes back, right? In the response, kind of bare bones? Or am I mixing up my flows again? I think that's where it, or is it user agent where it comes back kind of exposed? I think it's this one. But yeah, bottom line is you're trusting your username and password to a client app, and heaven help you if, you know, who knows what they're going to do with it. So avoid this unless you can't. This is like the last resort flow. And what would be a use case for using this though?
Mostly if you're using refresh token flow, you can actually generate using username password flow to get access tokens, and then you can use the refresh token in your applications.
Okay. Any other use cases?
Legacy, right? Like Igor was mentioning in one of those sessions.
Yeah, legacy applications. That's kind of the big use case I've seen here is if you're dealing with a legacy system and it can't do any other kind of flow, then use this. This is the flow of last resort, or for troubleshooting, or debugging or development, where, you know, this is not the production go live where you're trying to figure out what's going on. Good flow to use. Okay, common failure conditions for single sign-on. What causes single sign-on to fail? What are the common hotspots?
The certificate expired.
Yep.
The user federation wasn't found.
What else? What about if the clocks are out of sync?
Good one. Yeah.
Why would that cause an error?
There's a very short period of time that you can utilize the SAML response. So if your clocks are out of sync, when it sets that delta, that delta could be that it's already expired before you get a chance to use it, or a very small period to use it.
Yeah. Have you guys run into this? I mean,
yes, we actually had this where, for whatever reason, it was actually one of our servers or somebody's box was not, or they had got in and set the time differently, and it took a while to figure out what was.
I see.
But yeah, that definitely comes up on the exam. You know, common failure points, we've discussed them. So you're in good shape there. Did somebody mention expired certificates?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
What was the time difference though? Was that the one that was just a minute difference, or is that 10 minutes difference between?
I thought it was like 15 minutes for a SAML assertion.
I think it's only 5, actually.
I think it's 5.
None of the above. Okay.
None of the above. So,
I hope
but
they
yeah,
that detail.
I hope not either. Yeah. Yeah, the two answer options are, you know, the server is 5 minutes behind or the server is 10 minutes behind. Like, I don't know. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, explain why a solid SSO strategy is important for enterprise price security. Why would we want SSO?
I'll jump in here. One is to reduce cost. That would be one reason.
Mm-hmm.
It's more secure.
Yeah.
If people don't have to have 20 ID and passwords, they can have one.
Yeah, hopefully they won't have a list taped under their keyboard or in an Excel spreadsheet. Any other reasons?
User adoption.
User adoption. That's a great one. Yeah. All right. Covered all the ones I can think of. Nobody else has anything else. Let's move on. The risks to enterprise security that single sign-on aims to address. Kind of a follow-on from the previous question. So what risks can we mitigate by doing single sign-on? I think we already talked about, like, you know, leaving lists of passwords lying around.
Deprovisioning, right? So easier way to sort of remove access.
Mm-hmm. And deprovision.
It's a centralized user management or a credential management. I think that's really the key component there. So when it's federated, it's one point where it's all managed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on. Common point. Didn't we just do this?
Yeah, that's
okay. Same common points of failure. All right. Connected apps. Describe the roles connected apps play specifically with SAML. What important configuration points deal with SAML and connected apps?
We can, on a web app, we can enable the SAML configuration where we could use a SAML assertion, right? This, I think this goes back to what Igor was also saying. So if the Salesforce is the IDP and there is a connected app that needs to authenticate to Salesforce IDP, then we would use a SAML configuration, correct?
Okay.
Web app, especially.
All right. And then also remember start URL. If you set that, you can add your service provider to your app launcher. How about connected apps as they relate to OAuth? What kind of settings can we set there?
Enable OAuth. And the scopes, obviously, right? So enable OAuth, the scopes, and the profiles and permissions.
Yep. You can also enable them for device flows. There's an option there to require the client secret or not require it. IP restrictions, is that in the OAuth section?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so IP policies.
One thing about the IPs might be useful is that if you do have the IP settings, one is that the user's profile needs to have the set of registered IPs. If not, the org, it will differ to the org's IP addresses, right? Is that right?
So say that again. So you have the org trusted IPs.
So where do you set the IPs, right? So they are on the user profile to start with, which would, if it's on the user profile, it would take that. If not, it would go to the org's IPs. Is that right?
I'm not sure.
But typically, how would you do this? You would set it on the user profile, right? So if you enable this over here, then you would put the IP restriction on the user's profile.
Yeah, and then you can, but then you can relax the restrictions on the connected app.
Okay. I think there's one table out there I was looking at. There's a, at least when it comes to continuous IP validation or continuous IP plus this setting together, have a, how the Salesforce behaves, it differs. Maybe worth looking at that.
Okay. Study point. If you can find that chart, please add it to the resources page, the resources spreadsheet. All right, connected apps with mobile. What kind of configurations do we need to worry about if we're doing mobile work?
PIN, we could do that. We can again do the same refresh policy session.
Yeah, we'd probably want longer lived tokens on their mobile device.
You probably don't want, well, if you're going to put IP restrictions, you're going to have to either enter a two-factor or some other way to get around it, because your IPs are going to be much broader range.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's where you'd probably want to relax the IP policy if you're doing a mobile device, because they're probably not in the office or at home if they're on their mobile device. They're probably somewhere else, like at a client site. And we don't want to irritate our users by making them log in over and over and over again. All right, connected apps with Canvas. What kind of settings are important if we're dealing with a Canvas app?
SAML, there are two different settings, isn't there? This one is to signed URLs. The other one is, I'm forgetting that. The two is to set it up for the SAML.
Okay.
Anybody wants to jump in? Yeah.
We have two things, signed request and the OAuth. With the signed request, it's mostly through the signed request and with the admin approved profiles and permissions, where we can set in the connected app to use that setting, so that through signed request this can be those users can be authorized. The other way is like through OAuth, and user will have to approve themselves, or it could be when the admins can approve certain profiles and permission set users.
Okay.
So the difference is that if you use the signed signed URL, it's that sort of pre-authorized. Is that the difference?
Yeah, so with the signed request, the authorization details would be already be available as part of the post, and the Canvas app can utilize those as those information through the signed request.
Okay.
All right. Identity federation. Determine the general identity federation capabilities that are available for a given project. I don't know that we can actually talk about anything here, but just know that this is the kind of stuff they're going to ask you about on the exam. So what kind of things would you be looking for? What keywords are you looking for in the exam question to decide which way you're going to go with the federation solution? Like if they say, we don't like social media, what does that knock out for you as far as an option?
The social sign-on and the external identity providers.
Yeah, okay. And if they say, they have Active Directory, what might you want to think about for identity?
Identity Connect.
Okay. And what other kind of keywords, what other like common use cases or keywords can you guys think of that you want to be looking for as you're reading the question?
The systems support SAML as a standard. I don't know. That's almost like a prerequisite.
Yeah. It might be like if they say they have like an on-premises authentication provider, then we might be thinking delegated authentication for them.
I see. Okay. Got it.
That's about the only other one I can think of. Okay, one more. We're almost there, guys. So again, this is just kind of identity architecture design. Recommend the Salesforce technology that should be used. And on this one, I guess the three things they show there, Canvas connected app or app launcher, which one are you going to use? For example, when would you use Canvas versus just making it a connected app that they go out to?
Yeah, I think we touched upon this briefly, right? So we would use when you have a application that has to provide a deep experience within Salesforce, you would use Canvas so that you don't have to rewrite the UI, right? And we package the user interface in that will run on Salesforce, right? It would be external to Salesforce, but it would provide the same seamless experience with single sign-on. So that would be Canvas.
Okay.
App launcher would be a slightly different experience where it will launch into a new tab. It still provides a single sign-on, but app launcher could also provide where the service providers don't support single sign-on. You could just launch them, right? So it's a convenient place to have all of them in one place. But the best way to use it is to also set up single sign-on if the service providers support it.
Okay.
The connected apps is more for the external services just wanting to get your data, right?
Yeah, the biggest takeaway for me out of preparing for this exam was just how many things you can set on the connected app page. And not just the connected app page itself, but the policies of the connected app. Don't forget the policies.
So this is sort of confusing because if you are going to use Canvas, there is also a connected app piece to it. So I guess depending on how the question is laid out, you have to say, hey, connected app is needed, right? Because on a connected app, you can have OAuth, you can have a SAML setting, you can have the Canvas, you can have a web app.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that I saw was for Canvas apps, you might still need to write some JavaScript, either some client-side or some server-side code to get that session established. So just a little piece to keep in mind there. And if you don't have access to make that customization, then you might not be able to use Canvas because, otherwise you're going to make the user log in again rather than just grabbing their session information, and it's not a good user experience.
Is that what the Canvas SDK provides you with? I mean, one of the key, I guess, like you were saying in Natalya, requirement is to be able to either use that SDK, right?
Right. Right, and there's two method calls in there. The names escape me at the moment, but one is for client-based, like session establishing, and the other one is server-based establishing the session.
Got it.
So look those up, make sure you know which is which and that they're dealing with Canvas. And that, just a reminder, all the links are out there. If you haven't uploaded your slides from any presentations you've done, please upload them into the slide deck folder. I have had people ask me for them, and they say, hey, can we get access to a slide deck folder? And I say, yes, absolutely. Everybody has read-only access. So please put your slides in there so other people can reference them. Next steps, nothing new to study. Review what you've done, schedule your exam. Let us know when you're taking your exam, post it in the Slack channel so we can kind of have you in our thoughts on that day. And when you pass it, share your success in the Trailblazer community, share your tips for the next person that's preparing for it. And then go have a celebratory drink of your choice, whether that's a beer or a chocolate malt when you're done. And
so I'm diving in next Friday. I've already scheduled next Friday morning, so get it done over Christmas.
Good luck, Jeff. I'm diving in this afternoon. No wonder I'm asking so many questions.
Wait, did you say this afternoon?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Do it while it's fresh.
So
That's
this is just-in-time studying.
Yeah. All your thoughts will be helpful.
All right. Well, good luck to everybody. Again, go ahead, get that exam done. Igor already took it, so Igor, thanks for joining the party even after you were done.
Yeah, both you and Igor, thanks for continuing on even after you're successful.
Yeah. So pass on your knowledge to the rest of the group. Obviously, don't go exposing full exam questions, but general guidelines, they always allow those in the Trailblazer community to just kind of tell people what's coming next. And with that, our study group is done. You guys get your mornings back just in time for Christmas and New Year's.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.